Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and we are slowly but surely continuing on in the wonderful book, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt by Martha Sweezy. And she has so many wonderful examples in this book. So this one is about someone with kind of a codependent caretaking part that holds maladaptive guilt. So maladaptive guilt, as Martha explains, is different than adaptive guilt. So when we have adaptive guilt, we realize that our behavior is not in alignment, maybe with our own value or the value of the person in front of us. So we make repair. It's productive, it's creative. But maladaptive guilt usually is the taking responsibility of something that's not our responsibility. So it's not very useful. But Martha says here, there are many reasons why our parts may take on maladaptive guilt. She says, undeserved guilt, as we discussed, has no useful function. But vigilant social manager parts will promote guilt in the absence of a transgression for any number of reasons, including the fear of rousing a despairing exile if a relationship falters, or in the following case, the belief that loyalty is essential. So sometimes it can be easier for our system to assume responsibility than to come to grips with the fact that the other person's parts are being harmful, because that might threaten the relationship, which would then threaten the vulnerable, wounded parts of ourselves. Okay, so this example is about Sebastian. Sebastian was a 27-year-old cisgender heterosexual Asian American graduate student. His caretaking part, who emulated his father, would not let him set limits in a romantic relationship. As a result, he kept trying to rescue a girlfriend whose addictive process had undermined her ability to function or be in a relationship. His tenacious rescue efforts ended with her blaming him for her feelings of shamefulness, a problem that long predated their relationship, and her cannabis use. So often, in this case, perhaps the girlfriend has parts that are blaming him, and then he has parts that blame him in order to try to survive. So they're in agreement in a sense there, or at least some of their parts maybe. So Sebastian's caretaking part, this part that tries to rescue her, comes into therapy and says, Marguerite said it was my fault that she was high all day. But how could that be my fault? I would have done anything to help her. So you can kind of feel the desperation. Martha says, Sebastian, I hear you have a part who doesn't want you to be blamed for Marguerite's behavior. And Sebastian says, but she does blame me. And you can almost hear like the confusion in his system. Like, is it my fault? Is it not my fault? I hear kind of a few parts there. So Martha says, do any of your parts blame you? Good question. That was kind of what I was thinking. And Sebastian says, no, why would they? So that's an interesting response. Martha says, I was just checking. You've had a conflict. One part took care of Marguerite, while another part got more and more angry. So Martha's naming the polarity there. This is a very common polarity when we have essentially what are parentified child parts that perhaps had to take care of our parent. So then now in adult relationships, they try to take care of the other person and they feel worth in that, safety in that role. And so they're taking care of the other person, but often to their own expense. So then angry parts come in that value the person and have more self-agency and can see the boundaries that are being crossed. So whenever you or a client or someone has this rescuing, caretaking, codependent part, you can be guaranteed that they also have a polarized part that is very angry with the person who they perceive as taking advantage. Okay, so Sebastian's caretaking part continues. I kept trying and I got frustrated. Yes, I guess I could have left, but I knew I'd feel bad about giving up on her. So what else could I do? And then she blamed me. So here, Sebastian is naming a different polarity, one between the persistent caretaking part and the part who's trying to avoid future guilt. So Martha says, your angry part wanted to stop taking care of Marguerite, but the caretaking part said you would feel guilty if you stopped. Okay, so she's kind of naming it a little different there. Yeah, I feel like she said something different in the note and then in that, because she's still naming that the angry part is the one who wanted to leave, and the caretaking part felt panicked about that, right? And said, you're going to feel guilty if you do that, if you abandon her. So the caretaking part says yes, and Martha says, no wonder you've stuck it out so long. There's this threat of guilt, right? So the caretaking part says, yeah. And Martha says, how do you feel towards your caretaking part, Sebastian? Sebastian says, I appreciate him. So that's good. It's showing some self-energy. And Martha says, who does he protect? Sebastian says, everyone. That's a common response from those parts. And Martha says, inside of you or outside of you? Sebastian says, both. I really relate to this with my dear Cassandra, people-pleasing caretaking part. So Martha asks, is he worried about anyone in particular right now? The caretaking part says, not so much, I'm fine. So the caretaking part is blended and really has been throughout the conversation. So Martha says, okay, Marguerite has been unkind to you. Do any of your parts need help with that? So she's still trying to kind of make this U-turn of, can you focus in on the parts that are present around this and see who needs the self's help? Because as a IFS practitioner, what you're always doing is trying to facilitate the self to part relationship, to encourage curiosity, compassion, confidence, creativity, connection around whatever is present in the moment. So Sebastian's part says, I feel pretty good about myself. And so Martha makes the note that the caretaking part sacrifices Sebastian's good sense, but he also helps Sebastian feel good about himself, right? It's like, I've done what I need to do. I've taken care of her, and that so I'm good, right? You can see that at the root of that, if I don't caretake the other person, I'm a bad person, right? And the flip side of that is when I do caretake, even at my own expense, I'm a good person. I'm noticing my Cassandra part is relating to that. So Martha says, is the caretaker ready to relax? And the caretaker part says, yes, I did my best. Martha says, how does it feel to say that? And Sebastian says, true and sad. So Martha says, what was sad? He says, the outcome. And Martha says, your caretaking part, Sebastian, tried really hard, but got slapped down for his efforts. Does he see you now? Sebastian nods. What does he need from you? So again, she's trying to facilitate what we call in IFS a YOU turn, because the focus is on Marguerite, the girlfriend, and what she said and all of this. And Martha's trying to facilitate coming into the vertical relationship. Can yourself give attention to the parts of you who feel tired or sad or misunderstood? So Martha says, can you ask this part what they need from you? And Sebastian says, to know that I'm a good guy. Yes, yes, yes. That's what I intuited from this part, that at the root of it is, I just want to be good. Yeah. And Martha says, what is the most important thing about that? Like, tell me more about that. Sebastian says, he wants to be like my father. So sometimes we can have burdens from parents who were quote unquote abusive or neglectful. But other times we can have burdens from a parent that parts of us idolize, right? And like, I have to live up to some standard that a parent set. And it might even be the reputation of a parent who passed, or a parent that other people really revered. And so now if I don't live up to that, I am quote unquote bad. So Martha says, maybe he could use your help with that. He so wants you to be a good guy like your father that he couldn't let you make a sensible decision about a relationship that had become toxic. This is interesting. Martha is being very forthright here. Do you see what I'm saying? As Sebastian is not registering any internal conflict over this part's penchant for self-sacrifice, Martha says, I suggest paying attention to some costs. I could be wrong here, but I really sense a part of Martha, which I resonate with, that is kind of like really wanting this caretaking part to see, like she said, that basically they're not making sense, and that to see that the relationship is toxic. You know, it's like, I could be wrong, but I relate to it, that this almost rescuing part in Martha, that wants to rescue him from the relationship. And Sebastian's caretaking part reluctantly says yes. And Martha says, how do you feel toward the caretaking part, Sebastian? He says, I admire him. So she's bringing him back to that. This is an interesting thing. Martha says, this does not sound to me like Sebastian's self. Someone was asking about this in the IFS consultation group yesterday. That when you ask how the person feels, the client feels toward a part, anything overtly negative or positive is likely not self. So this, oh, I admire him, is potentially a part that is dependent or part of the posse of that part, right? So Martha's kind of hesitant here. Maybe this isn't self. So she says, yes, he is great. He has helped you in so many situations, but maybe he doesn't always want to have to work so hard. Would he like to meet you? She says, I want the caretaker to feel appreciated and to meet Sebastian's self. Sebastian says he is okay with that. So she's really, really trying. I think she senses, right, that the caretaking, rescuing, kind of codependent part has really run the show for Sebastian for so long. And of course, Martha is on the sidelines watching the damage that's being done in Sebastian's system from this. So she's really trying to encourage the self to part relationship so there can be some clarity and some wider perspective on this. So her final note is, Sebastian was trapped in a pattern of giving to a girlfriend who rejected his efforts and expressed no gratitude for his good intentions. And then he was shocked to discover how this arrangement opened him up to blame. I checked on whether other parts were criticizing his caretaker, and he said no. But the caretaker seemed blended, so I doubted we were actually hearing from other parts. Yeah. On top of not admitting to any conflict with other parts, the caretaker had no ambivalence about its job. To maintain flow in the session, I had to let go of my expectation that Sebastian would discover internal conflict over his caretaking behavior. But his caretaker part did confess his motive for continuing to take care regardless of Sebastian's best interest, which was loyalty to his father. Originally, I thought it was going to be loyalty to the girlfriend, but in some ways, the girlfriend represents the father in some ways. Because the part would not admit to any ambivalence or conflict with other parts, I decided I should just focus on getting him to unblend by introducing him to Sebastian's self. So that's a really interesting note there. I think when you encounter a big protector like this caretaking, fixing part, you can be sure that there is a polarized part inside, but because the client was so blended with this part, no other perspectives inside were being heard, at least. And so she's continually kind of trying to bring that up, and then she kind of represents the polarized part at one point, but look at the damage that the extreme part is causing. And then she reverts to, well, let me just get the self in connection with this caretaking part, because really that's always the key to all of our healing, is the relationship between the loving, confident, creative self and our parts that are just doing the very best they can. And the part did admit to feeling tired. So tell me in the comments if you have any questions, or maybe you have you relate to this caretaking part. Maybe you've been in a relationship where another person's parts were taking advantage of you, but you felt that if you put up a boundary, said no, left the relationship, that you would be a bad person. And ultimately, that shame at the core is really at the core of so much of what we do. So let me know if you resonate with that. And I'll see you next time.